Hi, readers and deep thinkers. Welcome back to Miss Pat's Reading Corner. I'm so happy you're here with me today. Are you talkative? Do you have a lot to say? I know I do. Well, if you do, you're going to love today's story. Today's story is called Ruby Rene Had So Much to Say, written by Ashley Iman, illustrated by Gladys Jose. So, if you're a person who has a lot to say, who loves facts and sharing those facts with friends and family and classmates, then you're going to love this story. Are you curious about Ruby Rene? I am. Let's get into it. Ruby Rene had so much to say. Did you know that flamingos don't have teeth? I could do a cartwheel and I've almost got my tumble. How many stars are in the universe? Asking questions, stating facts, sharing dreams. Ruby Rene could talk for hours. Fact, other facts, more facts. Ruby learned to talk early and to question even earlier. Her curiosity was nurtured by her favorite podcast. Each fact was a little gift, one she couldn't wait to share with anyone who would listen, especially at school. Well, there she is, chilling on her couch, listening to her facts. Today we're going to learn about the American Revolution. Mrs. Hanson settled the class and began. Ruby's hand shot up. Did you know that Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence? Yes, thank you, Ruby. Now, class, turn to. And Ruby, hold it in your brain. We can talk more later. But Ruby Rene had so much to say. Ruby turned to her neighbor and tried hard to whisper. I think the war was between the United States and England. Ruby, no talking. Ruby slumped in her chair. 20 minutes later, it was time for science. Ruby buzzed in her seat. Science was her favorite subject. Ruby, let's let someone else share. Ruby thought, but I have so much to say. The warning bell rang for lunch. Mrs. Hanson searched for the menu on her desk, but before she could find it, Ruby jumped in. Today's lunch is mac and cheese with little smokies. I don't like little smokies though, so I asked my mom to pack my lunch. Mrs. Hanson let out an exasperated sigh. Ruby stared at her, confused. After all, Mrs. Hanson couldn't find the menu and she was only trying to help. Oh, she thought. She wanted me to share the side options too, maybe? You can also get sliced oranges. I need all voices off, Mrs. Hanson interrupted. But I'm not finished, Ruby tried again. Now! The tone of Mrs. Hanson's voice told Ruby that she should not try again. You can also get baby carrots and ranch. She couldn't help herself. Once she got going, it seemed impossible for her to stop. By the time she got home that evening, Ruby had forgotten all about the lunch menu debacle, but it seemed Mrs. Hanson hadn't. Ring! The phone rang, interrupting dinner. Ruby's mom answered. She's such a bright girl, but that Ruby Rene has so much to say. Ruby could hear her teacher's voice through the phone. Suddenly, Ruby wasn't so hungry anymore. She'd only wanted to share her thoughts with her friends, and now she was in trouble. Going upstairs to her room. Ruby paced back and forth in her room. She had to think of something. She liked Mrs. Hanson and didn't want to get in any more trouble. How did people share messages when they couldn't talk? Hand signals, maybe? Morse code? Tap, tap, tap. Knock, knock, knock. Tap, tap, tap. It's working already, she thought. But when she looked up, she saw her dad standing at her door. Dad, I didn't mean to, Ruby started. Dad smiled warmly and placed his hand on her shoulder. Oh, Ruby, Rene, you have so much to say, but you have to let Mrs. Hanson get through her lesson too. Ruby nodded and launched into her plan to use Morse code the next day. She just had to figure out how to teach the rest of her classmates. Ruby's dad chuckled and hugged his talkative little girl. How about we try this instead? He placed a small lavender journal on the bed between them. When you have something to share, just write it down here. Ruby gazed at her new journal and smiled. She had a plan. When a thought popped into her head, she would reach for her journal. She hadn't quite figured out how she would share her thoughts with her friends, but at least she'd be quiet and out of trouble. The next day, Ruby was determined not to say a word. Mrs. Hanson drew a circle on the board and divided it into 3 equal parts. Ruby's eyes grew wide. Fractions! A fraction has a numerator and a denominator. We see fractions in real life, like in pizza and on the soccer field, even on the clock. Ruby swallowed every thought. She's trying so hard not to blurt out. Are you guys doing fractions yet? She searched in her desk for her lavender journal to capture all the fraction facts zooming through her head. She was so busy trying to stop herself from sharing that she didn't hear a single word Mrs. Hanson said. An hour into the school day, Ruby had filled 5 pages of her journal. Mrs. Hanson taught a lesson on the beginning of the American Revolution, and Ruby wrote notes about Crispus Attucks. Mrs. Hanson hadn't mentioned him, and Ruby was upset that she couldn't share his story. Sure, the journal was keeping her out of trouble, but what good was a fact if you couldn't share it? The story of Crispus Attucks, that's a good one. By PE, Ruby hadn't uttered a single word. She couldn't take it anymore. She loved school because she felt like she could share as much as she learned, but now it felt so one-sided. As Coach B explained the rules of dodgeball, Ruby turned to the kid next to her. Did you know that the first game of dodgeball was played hundreds of years ago in Africa? Some people don't think kids should play because... Womp. Uh-oh. Looks like Ruby might have gotten hit in the head. That's quite a bump there, Ruby. What happened? Ruby looked up and saw the principal, Miss Gale, smiling at her in the nurse's office. She sighed and told her all about her dilemma. Miss Gale thought for a moment and said, "Where in Africa?" Ruby was confused. What? Africa's a big place, sweetheart. Where specifically did they play the first game of dodgeball? Ruby blushed with excitement. I'm not sure, but I can find out for you. Ruby's so excited that someone is into her facts. They want to hear more from her. Not just me, Ruby. I think the entire school would like to hear what you have to say. I've been thinking we should share a new fact every day during the morning announcements. Do you think you could help with that? Oh my gosh, of course. Ruby beamed. She imagined herself sitting behind a big microphone, just like her podcast heroes. You got it, Miss Gale. I'm not going to let you down. This is like a dream come true for Ruby Rene. At dismissal, Ruby ran to her family's minivan. How was your day, Ruby? Her dad asked, peering at her through the rearview mirror. What do you know about dodgeball? She said, pulling out her lavender notebook. I have to prepare for my segment. There she is preparing. She's researching, taking notes, reading books, writing it all down in her lavender notebook, drawing pictures, making sure she has her notes for the next day. And here we go to school. This is so exciting. The next morning, Ruby sat up tall in the principal's office waiting for Miss Gale to pass her the intercom. Good morning, Spring Lake. My name is Ruby Rene, and here is your fact of the day. She's a natural. Dodgeball was first played more than 200 years ago by African warriors in training. That Ruby Rene has so much to say. The end. Here is the back of the book. When the right people are listening, you can never have too much to say. Oh my goodness. Did you guys like that story? I hope so. I hope if you are a talker, if you related to this story and you like to share facts and you find yourself blurting out and the teacher is always saying, so and so, just hold on to that thought. You can share later. Let me finish my lesson first. If that's you, I want you to maybe think about doing what Ruby Rene did. She got a journal, and that way you can journal all of your fun facts, all of the information you're learning, and then you can take that journal and share it with your friends and family. And if you can't, you can also, here's a thought, you can write a book. You can write a book with that journal. All of those stories can be compiled into, who knows, poems and books and more stories. So if you love to talk, just remember, don't interrupt the teacher. Raise your hand before you speak out. That's the most important thing when you're in the classroom, okay? All right, readers and deep thinkers, thank you for sharing this story with me today. Remember, stay curious about the world around you, ask lots of questions, and read, read, read. Until next time, bye.